Well, welcome to the Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You podcast. My name is Sean Langwell, and I am your host. And if you like honest, vulnerable, and real stories about what it takes to not only become great, but self-confident and bold enough to be yourself, then this show is for you. Each of my guests started out as ordinary people like you and me, but have accomplished extraordinary things in their lives to be considered great masters or experts at what they have been called to do. Join me each episode for inspiring, encouraging, and meaningful conversations with diverse people from all walks of life and industry. Leaders and brave individuals who offer unique insights into the fields of arts, entertainment, business, finance, technology, healthcare, sports, psychology, recovery, self improvement, personal growth, and so much more. Whether you are in the same field as my guests or not, I guarantee you will walk away from each episode feeling better about yourself and inspired to take the next bold step toward your own goals and aspirations. Your life will improve if you dare to be great and dare to be you. And folks, we have a very special guest today, and we're going to talk about some stuff as a disclaimer up front that is quite honestly, it's killing people. The stats that I have from this episode that's called One Pill that won, what was the award, Michelle?
An
It won
Emmy
an Emmy.
Award.
It won an Emmy Award. Okay, so Michelle Leopold is the owner of multiple Ace hardware stores throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. We're going to dive into a deep personal conversation. I'm going to let her tell most of that story. But just so you have a little background about who Michelle is, first and foremost, she's a mom and all of her efforts and a tough mom at that. She's the mom and CMO charitable contributions at six is the mom and pop Ace hardware stores in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's been a serial mom volunteer with everything from mothers clubs to Cub Scouts, Little League, and especially the PTA. She's the dog mom to two fur babies, Marley and Maverick, who insist they are smaller than 225 pounds combined. Most importantly, she's the mom to Parker, who just graduated from CSU Channel Islands at age of 23, and his older brother Trevor, forever 18. Michelle is one tough mother, so much so that she actually just recently had that tattooed to her ankle. Michelle, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be here, and thanks for having me.
I'm so glad, and I don't know exactly where we want to jump in, but um, I've known you through other circles. You're a business owner. That's probably where our paths crossed initially, maybe at one point initially through my work in ad sales down in Marin County. But this isn't about work. This isn't a self-promotion piece for work or Ace Hardware. This is a heartfelt episode that you and I are going to have a conversation about what happened with your son, Trevor. And if you want, I'm going to just let you tell the story because you've probably told it 100 times. Share with our listeners what happened and where you're at with this now, because it's been a little over 6 years and there's been a lot of change, but not a lot of change. And we'll talk about the change later on. But first and foremost, tell us about Trevor.
So, Trevor is my nature-loving uh, mountain goat spirit animal boy. He was always looking for heart-shaped rocks when we'd go on hikes around the Bay Area and find them for me. He had a huge rock and crystal collection too.
Mm,
Um, And he was so loving and kind and sweet until high school when he was introduced to today's high potency THC products. And he decided he liked that immensely. And his personality changed literally overnight. Trevor all of a sudden went from loving nature to hating everything, including his family and his parents. And it got so bad that we ended up having him kidnapped and taken to a rehab because he was under 18 years old and
mm,
I didn't know how to parent my child. So at this point is when I started going to Nar-Anon meetings because it was highly recommended by the facility that Trevor was at, to go to at least 6 meetings just to know what they're about in case it might help you. I tried Al-Anon as well, but Novato Nar-Anon was definitely where I felt was the right place for me. And that was 9 years ago.
Oh my gosh. And just briefly fill people in who aren't familiar with the 12-step terminology and the difference between Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, because there is a substantial
Sure.
difference.
So the first step at any 12-step meeting is I admitted I was powerless over. Insert blank of what you're powerless over. And in Nar-Anon, which is related to Narcotics Anonymous, I was powerless over the addict.
Hmm.
And it didn't sit right when I went to Al-Anon meetings because I was powerless over the alcoholic. And Trevor didn't drink alcohol. He used THC products. So for me, at the time, that was where I needed to be. I understand now that it doesn't really matter what you put in that last word. But for me, I needed to say addict and not alcoholic.
And I think the reason I asked that question for the listeners who aren't familiar with some of this is there is a substantial difference from a relatability and a parenting standpoint or a significant other standpoint when you're dealing with various mental illnesses, in particular drug induced, whether it's alcohol or drugs, and the nomenclature is quite different, as is some of the personalities and the effects, correct?
Correct. I had to find what felt right for me.
Okay. So, nature loving, collecting heart rocks along the beach, and personality change. Let's pick up there.
So I didn't understand because I knew marijuana from my high school and college days and not since, but
Hmm.
I rapidly learned that today's marijuana is totally different than the marijuana of 30 years ago. And I didn't know what to do with all this information. And I did start a website at that point, thinking that other people might not know that today's pot is not the same. And that website was My Kid Smokes Pot Now What, I believe. Um, and the information has only gotten worse since I posted that probably 9 years ago. Um, so that was Trevor's freshman year. He went away the beginning of his sophomore year. He couldn't go back to the public high school in Marin that he was going to because of he would just go back to the same thing he was doing.
Hmm.
So he went to another private school, came back to his public school junior year, and everything circled downward again. We were in the process of having a talking to an educational consultant about a next step for Trevor
Hmm.
when he got arrested by the police, taken to Marin General for 5150, which is a psychiatric evaluation for those of you who fortunately don't know that name. And he was taken to juvenile hall. And while he was there, we said, these are the problems that we've been seeing. He had two misdemeanors, and one against a police officer and another at Marin General. So they wanted him to do some sort of probation. And we said, well, we were working on having him go to a wilderness program. And they said if Trevor agrees, that can serve as his probation.
Okay.
So junior year, Trevor was at Wilderness and at another rehab in Utah. Then he came back senior year. He was a lot better, but he was still using drugs. He had applied to a bunch of Cal States and got accepted to almost all of them. He
Wow.
chose to go to Sonoma State, and at this point, I understand he was self-medicating for his anxiety with prescription pills.
Okay.
Percocet, I understand, was his drug of choice, but he would try everything and use anything. And on November 17th, 2019, he took it was a blue M30 oxycodone. And unfortunately, he didn't know, but it had a lethal amount of fentanyl in that one pill. And he died in his dorm room at the age of 18 from fentanyl.
And I want you to go ahead and clarify it, and thank you. This is trusting me to do this again. I'm sure you've told this story numerous times, but this will be out there just like the other stuff that you've already done for the sole purpose of trying to reach some parents who have teenagers or young adults and you don't quite know what to do. And as a parent, um, you know, how did you process that? And just walk us through it. I don't want to take this away from you, Michelle, um, because you're 6 years removed. But when my brother died in a car accident at the age of 28, just before his 29th birthday, I don't know if there was drugs involved. I don't know if it was unconscious suicide. There was alcohol in the car, but the way that it was described, he was curled up on a ball and basically swerved and ran into a tree out here on East Washington Boulevard. So the the insidiousness of all forms of drugs and alcohol and disease for those who are trying to fill this hole, it's a family disease, and that's what Nar-Anon and Al-Anon are all about, is it is a family disease because it affects the individual, but as parents and relatives, that's the effect that we get to do. And I want you to talk about that a little bit because um, I'm so sorry for your loss because you can't. My mom's living with me now, and she can't ever replace losing a son. How do
No.
you do that?
Mm-mm.
How do you do that? I've almost lost my other brother twice
Yeah,
due to
it's
alcoholism. It just, yeah.
it's life changing. And for the good or bad, I now have literally hundreds of friends across the United States whose children have died from fentanyl. Some people call it drug overdoses. Most of us call it being poisoned, drug-induced homicide. Yes, Trevor was taking something that was not prescribed to him, but he didn't intend to take something that would kill him.
Right.
And this was the beginning of the fentanyl crisis. Unfortunately, we had already gone to a funeral for one of Trevor and his brother Parker's friends who had died in July in 2019. And I knew also of fentanyl from being in the rooms, which is what you say if you're in 12-step programs, you usually hear more about what drugs are out there if you are in the rooms. And so I knew fentanyl was infiltrating the drug supply, but I never thought it would be my child.
No, and that's a part of your advocacy in terms of the outreach and having Narcan available at your ACE stores, doing outreach in the community, teaching people. I don't want to cross the lines here, but I know that there was a concerted effort with the company I work for of doing a public awareness campaign that's basically WTF, where's the fentanyl? Because it isn't intentional. This is poisoning. And that's what people don't understand is that seniors who are on fixed income who may be trying to save a few dollars and order it online, whatever it is, it doesn't matter if it's oxycodone or Percocet or arthritis medication, there's that risk that according to what was on the video, one pill, 2 micrograms is enough to kill most people.
Exactly.
That's like the head of two pins, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a couple of granules of sugar.
And
That's all it takes to be mixed in with what looks like a regular pill. And that's why this epidemic was so widespread. And unfortunately, Trevor died right before COVID. And all of a sudden, the deaths of 15 to 25-year-olds spiked during COVID because they were in their house alone, bored, no
Mhm.
activities, and they were fed a pill for whatever it was. It could be even ecstasy. This will make you happy. This will make you feel good. But even MDMA and ecstasy are being laced with fentanyl these days.
And even
And
marijuana, I mean, I remember, I don't want to share, this isn't about me, but I remember one time in high school where I have a feeling the weed that I smoked was laced with, it was pure, it was black tar, it was pure heroin, but
yeah,
I nodded off and I was like, what in the world was going on?
yeah,
And I had never, I was just telling my wife about this. I don't forget that feeling and I hated it.
yeah. It's And this, the only good thing about my son dying from fentanyl is it was immediate and
Hmm.
painless. But that really sucks. That's okay. That's the only good thing. Um, but the fentanyl slows down your respiratory system. So, a couple of facts about fentanyl: it's 100 times stronger than morphine, 50 times stronger than that black tar. 50 times.
50 times.
Yeah. And it has been used in medical situations. I just had fentanyl actually for an operation last month, but I didn't take it. The anesthesiologist gave it to me.
Right.
And it's really great because it's a super strong pain reliever. It slows down your respiratory system. So it's great for surgery. But in slowing down your respiratory system, it slows down your breathing, which slows down your heart, which is a vicious circle. And Trevor slowed his whole body down by taking that one pill. And this was in 2019 when Narcan wasn't even legal in all 50 states.
It wasn't. Okay.
And RAs didn't have naloxone and weren't trained on overdose prevention. Um, and it was a whole different situation. So that night, when we found out that Trevor died, I told my husband, we can't be quiet about this. This in Nar-Anon meetings, you aren't supposed to talk about your addicted loved one. Um, but after he passed away, Trevor's story became my story to tell. And
Hmm.
I told Jeff, we need to share this to prevent other parents from burying their children. So, literally from day one, I was loudly sharing how Trevor died, but also how people could prevent it from happening to themselves. I do a lot of talks with, so my sweet spot is young adults because that's my lived experience.
Sure.
And so I talk to a lot of high schools, especially, but colleges, especially Sonoma State, where I'm really grateful to have been invited several times. And I talk to kids as young as sixth and seventh grade through Boy Scouts or Scouts, and also Kent Middle School, where Trevor went to middle school. And the stories I share with them, it's usually on the Song for Charlie, a nonprofit organization, and their messaging is directly to young adults about one pill or one line can kill. And don't trust any drugs unless you got it from your pharmacist or your doctor. And those are the two messages I have shared thousands of times.
And this is why it's such a treat to have you on the show. I know you've already done a lot, but there's still a lot more to be done. I don't know what the current stats are, but the I have not yet seen the curve start to go downward like it did with alcohol to a certain extent and pot for a while. But, at last count from 2022, according to One Pill, there were a total US opioid deaths of 1.148 million people who died of an overdose. And you alluded to that, just in one of the years in 2022, 109,000 people died from a fentanyl overdose, which you equated to, that's the equivalent of a Boeing 747 or a big jet. It doesn't have to be Boeing. A jet going down every single day for an entire year. That's what that equates to. So just think about the trauma, folks out there. And I'm going to do some advocacy for you right here because I'm in sales. It's what I do. But my goodness, this is a real issue. And it's not something that can be swept under the carpet, or put out to sea. It's something that is very real, and it's affecting every single community across the globe, not just drug addicted folks. And I would like you, in your words, to talk about that from the youth perspective. Share a little bit about what the message is that you give, because you've done most of the work and that's your sweet spot, but also for the seniors who happen to be, there's a lot of my listeners that are in their 60s plus who are writers, who are experiencing pain and age related illnesses. Let's talk about both. And then I'm going to share, I have my screen on, but there,
That works.
this works. This is a solution that has been out there for a while, and Michelle has done a phenomenal job of teaching communities how to do this. If you don't know, call 911. But if you have this in your car, what do they do?
Well, call 911 and give Narcan.
Right.
That's the best thing. Do both of those things as soon as you possibly can. So my messaging, I've been involved in a lot of different organizations, but I realize that I really need to focus on Trevor's life and death. I don't know if you remember the billboards in San Francisco about San Francisco's famous for their sourdough bread and cable cars and Dungeness
Hmm.
crab and fentanyl. And I was really grateful to work with the Mothers Against Drug Addiction Deaths. But I realized, that wasn't Trevor. So I love them and I still support them, but my advocacy is really focused on Trevor's life and death. So I share the word about how important it is if you are taking drugs that didn't get come from your pharmacy or your doctor, to have someone with you that has naloxone in case what you are taking has fentanyl in it. Uh, there are fentanyl test strips. I don't recommend them for the high schoolers and middle schoolers that I speak with. It's important if you're using a lot of drugs. I think that's a much better use of distributing fentanyl test strips. But I talk to middle schoolers,
Yeah.
and I tell them it's important to find things to do instead of taking that pill.
Hmm.
We live in a very pill-centered society where you take a pill for whatever ails you, but there are a lot of other options besides pills to feel better. And of course, lines. There were two high schoolers in Santa Rosa that died last year. And it's important to know that it's not just in pill form. It's also looks like cocaine and meth and other powder substances. I also tell the high schoolers that always ask questions about what else is getting mixed in. It's all about economics. The
Hmm.
drug dealers want to make money. So they are going to be mixing it in something that makes economic sense.
Sure.
And that's why it's usually pills that people would be paying for. The whole this is the fourth, we're in the fourth version of the of the opioid. Oh, I'm going to start that whole sentence over.
It's
We're
okay.
we're in the fourth phase of the opioid epidemic that started with Purdue Pharma overprescribing OxyContin pills. That was the first phase. After the government realized that doctors were overprescribing, and some pill farms were literally prescribing thousands of pills a day. That's when they cut down on the prescriptions, and that's when the drug dealers came in because the street OxyContin was $40 a pill, but you could sell heroin for a lot less than $40, and it had essentially the same effect. So that was phase two. Then the drug cartels realized that fentanyl's a lot cheaper to make than having to grow heroin.
Hmm.
And so fentanyl, which is just a couple of chemicals mixed together in your bathtub or in a 5-gallon bucket, that became phase three. And now, sadly, we're in phase four where they're mixing in xylazine and other drugs in addition to or instead of fentanyl. But the current cost, I understand, in the Tenderloin is about $5 for one hit. You need several hits a day if you're addicted, but $5 is economical. And like when the high schoolers or middle schoolers ask about it being mixed into pot, I say, it costs more. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to mix fentanyl. They're mixing the fentanyl to get more people addicted and to keep up the demand in their supply and demand. Anyway, enough about
Well,
economics.
no, but it's important. I'm glad you spent the time to talk about the economics of that because it is an economic equation, as is a lot of things in this country. And the economics when you can have something that it has mass appeal and demand for those that are looking at it with a low barrier to entry, i.e., economics, you know, I haven't done it before, but I would imagine it's not that difficult to panhandle $5 to go get enough to score. And
Exactly.
that compared to $40 a pill for the first iteration, and then you start cutting it, it's easier to just do it. It sounds to me like it's just straight up. It's not even being blended at that level. It's just straight up fentanyl, and you have to trust that whoever those dealers are going to not put out onto the street a deadly dose because it doesn't make sense for them economically from a business standpoint, but from a human standpoint, it's just stupid.
Yeah.
So it's insidious. I don't want to get on my soapbox, but I watched the two movies that were out there about Purdue Farms, and it's just, I read Barbara Kingsolver's book. We got to meet her in person, and
Great.
it's flat out disgusting, Michelle. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
So the good news, though, is that the numbers are going down or did. So we're
okay.
always about a year behind in the data. But 2024 did see a drop in overdose deaths. And I'd like to say it's because of the widespread naloxone out there, which is the generic term for Narcan. Most people are familiar with Narcan, but naloxone is to facial tissue as Kleenex is to Narcan. And the deaths also, I think, are going down because, especially young adults, know now because there's an army of grieving parents that are out there screaming into the void. One pill can kill, one line can kill. Don't trust any drugs unless you get them from your doctor or your pharmacist.
So this is you're 6 years into this, you're nine into recovery. What's the next phase? You started to touch briefly on it about just keeping it centered around Trevor and his death because that's lived experience. That's where your heart can come through. I know what that's a big part of why I wrote Beyond Recovery. It was I woke up from a dream. My deceased brother was clear as day, and he said, "Sean, you need to tell our story."
Yeah,
And I'm sharing that with you because you get to tell Trevor's story for as long as you want to.
yeah. And how I do these things, I really believe that Trevor also has a big say in what he wants out there. There's been weeks where, so back up a second, on social media, I use the hashtag Trevor is everywhere because I do believe that he's
Mhm.
here in spirit with me. But also because there's been so many crazy, more than a coincidence. For instance, one week I did a podcast with somebody in LA, and then the next week the LA Times calls for an interview. And I'm like, okay, I guess Trevor's in Los Angeles this week. The chance that I got both of those in such a short time, they had not posted the podcast yet. And then there's been other times where I'm like, oh, I guess Trevor's touring through Europe because I'll get a request from England and Spain the same month.
Wow.
So Trevor's story has gone everywhere, which I'm heartbroken and grateful for. And by the way, practicing the and is one of the big things that I
Mhm.
do to get through, because I'll always be devastated that my son is no longer here. And I can continue living my life in Narnon, in our Hope After Loss group, which we haven't mentioned yet. Um, all of us in that Narnon group have lost a loved one to the disease of addiction. And we end with uh, just for today, because sometimes in 12-step meetings, in 12-step lifestyles, you need to take things one day at a time, or 1 hour at a time, or sometimes 1 minute at a time. But one of the things that somebody almost invariably says is, just for today, I will remember that I am the one who is still alive.
Yeah. And I'm gonna, can I dig deep just a sec because
Yeah.
this is something that is challenging for those. I have that experience as a sibling of losing my son. I've watched and nurtured my mom um, with her own grief of losing her son. 5, 7 years ago, my brother, two different times, was literally on his deathbed, and I was the first one to greet him from a family perspective at Memorial Hospital up in Santa Rosa. But I totally lost my train of thought because I went down a rabbit trail. But basically, what is it that you do to stay focused and still be present and loving for what you can to carry that message forward? Because we get to process this grief. It doesn't mean that it's going to change anything, but sometimes that grief is so consuming that we don't know how to make our way through it. So that's the point I was trying to make is how you've talked about 9 years in Narnon, but specifically if there's a couple people out there who have recently lost or are really worried about their kid who's using, what could you do to share your own experience in that regard, Michelle?
So my answer is service and self-care or self-support. And I did both of those things because I wasn't finding it when Trevor died. I am eternally grateful for Narnon. I don't think I would be here without having had that already in my back pocket when Trevor died. And I tried on a couple of grief groups after Trevor died, but it wasn't right for me. And I remember calling my Narnon sponsor saying, I'm looking for a grief group with recovery.
Hmm.
I don't want to be stuck in a hole for the rest of my life.
Right.
I want to move on, but I know I will always carry this grief. And my sponsor said, well, if you build it, they will come. And so I found out there's one in-person Narnon meeting in New Jersey that focuses on people whose loved ones have died from the disease of addiction. And I talked to that person, wonderful Vicky in New Jersey, about her meeting. And I said, okay, well, I'll start one in California. We'll have bookends on either end of the United States. And I had it all lined up to have a meeting in person at Kaiser in San Rafael. And then the guy called from Kaiser saying, there's this weird virus going around, and we're
Mm.
not allowing any in-person meetings. So we're really sorry, but you can't hold your meeting here. And I was on a Zoom meeting probably that night complaining about I was going to start this new meeting and yeah, it didn't happen. And then the light bulb went on. Oh, that might be a higher power moment. There might be a reason why I'm not supposed to do it in person. And one of the people on the phone call said, Michelle, I'll help you. We'll set up a Zoom account for the meeting. We'll set up a website for the meeting. And the first meeting of this unique Naranon group was April of 2020. We had 20 people on Zoom for our very first meeting, and they were all over the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm like, okay, well, how are we ever going to meet together after this coronavirus is over? And the second meeting, we had people all up and down California at our Zoom meeting. And that's when we realized, all of us realized, we're never going to be meeting in person. We're going to be online forever. So at the first meeting, we had a group conscience to decide what we would call ourselves and throwing out all sorts of ideas. One of the women, Sarah, said, how about hope after loss? And all of us stopped, mic drop.
Mm.
That's it. And because we all were looking for that recovery because of our own experiences in Narnon, and some of them came from Al-Anon because Al-Anon didn't have this sort of meeting.
Right.
And Hope After Loss was born that at that point 5.5 years ago. And now we have 4 meetings every week. And we have had over 1,200 people come through our door in the past 5.5 years. And we're all over the world. We're not just Northern California.
And you talked about, sometimes the higher power door is closed and we can wallow and lick our wounds that it wasn't what we wanted, but sometimes there is a bigger picture. And now you have this opportunity to adjust, modify, and reach people all over the globe.
Yeah.
And that's phenomenal. It just is. So give us the website address for those who happen to be listening in who have not yet heard about this. What is it?
So our website is naranonhopeafterloss.org, all one word. And you can also find us on the nar-anon.org website. That's the international website. But we we welcome people looking for somewhere to share their lost loved one's name and to be with a group of people who uniquely get having someone with a disease of addiction in your life for several years before they die, because it's a whole different kind of death that we keep on realizing, at almost every single meeting, somebody says, this is exactly the group I needed.
So just for clarity's sake, because I've got quite a few years and experience in other 12-step programs, is the function of this autonomous group that you created, is it reserved for people who have actually experienced loss, or is it open for those who may be concerned about a loss?
That regular Narnon meetings, we joke about for civilians, are probably a lot better to
Okay.
go to for general help because we usually start off our meetings sharing the name of our loved one because we don't have an opportunity to say their name elsewhere. And when you're in a room with 12 people all talking about their dead addict, it can be very triggering if you are hoping for recovery for your the addict in your life. So
That's
I recommend Naranon, um, and hopefully you'll never have to find us. We always say, I just texted a new person. I said, I'm so sorry that you joined the club that none of us wanted to join, but we're so glad you found us.
and I'm glad I asked that qualification question
Yeah.
because for those
Yeah.
who are complete novices about what Michelle and I are talking about, there are open
Yes.
closed meetings for most 12-step programs. The open meetings are open to the general public. There are closed meetings for those who identify with whatever that issue or disease is. And in this
Yeah.
case, it's
But
not
you're
necessarily
anybody's
closed,
yeah,
right?
anybody's welcome to come,
Right.
but our focus is different than a regular Narnon
And
meeting.
that's good to have that clarification. You're not excluding anyone, uh,
No,
but
we
the
are a
focus.
Narnon meeting. We are listed on the Narnon website.
I have a question and you don't have to answer it, but I'm looking at this, your intro and siblings. I, he's not here to talk about himself, but as his mother, how has Parker adapted? He's just graduated from CSU. How has that, as his mother, been navigating a young adult with the loss of a sibling? If you want to talk about it, if you don't, that's cool too.
At any navigating the growing up part of any child is not all a bed of roses. But
I'm sorry, I'm asking a somewhat loaded question and I'm hearing you out. You do not have to talk about this.
that's okay. So Parker was a senior in high school when Trevor died. Um, he got some support from his friends, but he had a drive-through graduation for high
Mhm.
school and didn't have a senior prom. And then when he was applying for colleges, he couldn't even go visit the colleges that he was applying to. So we ended up dropping him off at the dorm.
Oh,
And
because this all happened during the pandemic, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And Parker had never seen CSU Channel Islands, and we didn't realize it's a beautiful old California State building in the middle of strawberry fields. So that was quite a surprise, but it sucked. He wasn't even allowed to go into other people's dorm rooms his
Hmm.
first year. And that with grief is horrific.
Yeah.
So he did eventually find his way. He made friends, started a fraternity or joined a fraternity, which has since closed. But the one thing that I love, the two things that I love that he shows his understanding and service in his grief is he makes amazing music.
Hmm.
And I wish I could tell you how to find him. He's on Spotify. I think it's under Pack, P-A-K, but I don't even know that.
Okay.
But he's written songs for his brother in his grief, and it's one of the ways that he has found an outlet. But the other thing is, there's been a handful of times that he's come with me on my talks for Song for Charlie, for instance, and to the seventh graders and to the Youth Transforming Justice in San Rafael. And he always tells me, Mom, you know they were paying more attention to me than they were to you. And I'm like, that's fine. I love it. And the seventh grade teacher is like, oh yeah, they'd much rather listen to this, good-looking 23-year-old wearing the stylish Nike tennies. And so I'm really grateful that he feels comfortable in his grief to share about his brother.
I
And
think it's
hopefully
important.
he'll be working that in the years ahead also.
Oh, I think that it's important, and thanks for sharing that little spot of light because I don't know. I trust my gut. I said that before we started recording. I don't know where any of these episodes ever go, and I love that about it because these are real conversations. It's the whole nature of the show. You've been a business owner. How long have you owned? You've been a business owner for a long time too, haven't you?
Yeah, I joke about my husband marrying me for my marketing expertise. He and his dad owned Standard 5 and 10 Ace on California Street in Laurel Village in San Francisco. So I married into the business 30 years ago and have been helping with the marketing for 30 years. We opened Marin Ace in San Rafael in 2011. And so and now we have six.
It's
So it's been a lot of work, but though I did mention to you though at one point in 2021, no, 20, yeah, no, 2022, um, I had boundaries between my work
mm,
and my volunteering around Trevor up until 2022. That's when a bunch of my friends whose kids died from fentanyl poisoning and didn't feel comfortable supporting International Overdose Awareness Day with their child under the fentanyl poisoning heading. So they started 10 days before Overdose Day in August, they started Fentanyl Day. Um, and I figured at that point I should do something to honor both of those events in August. And that's when all my boundaries disappeared. I had told the managers of our six stores, hey, what do you think if we do naloxone training and overdose prevention in front of all six of our stores during this period in August? And all six of them said, yes, let's do that. So that's when I started this crazy idea that took on a life of its own. We did just 1 hour trainings in front of each of our stores over that 10-day period. I told the news because I thought, hey, if we could get a little bit more exposure by this, that'd be
mhm.
great. And it totally blew huge. And again, I like to think that Trevor had something to do with getting the word out there because he knew that getting naloxone into as many hands as possible could save lives because it could have saved his life if the person in his dorm room at the time knew about the signs of overdose, they would have known that Trevor wasn't snoring. It was the death rattle. Trevor was making gurgling noises at the end of his life. And they didn't know that it was the signs of overdose. And also, Narcan was not everywhere in 2019. And if they had Narcan, they could have reversed Trevor's overdose. So, with that in mind, that's when I started tabling at our six stores and incorporating Narcan training in some of the trainings that we did, especially to parents, and making sure that there is Narcan in people's homes and first aid kits, businesses' first aid kits that will be on the law next, not 26, I believe 27, that law takes effect in California. Um, and also in 2022, when I started this effort, um, there weren't a lot of nonprofits giving out Narcan, but now there are so many, which I'm so grateful for. So for all these reasons, I did it for 4 years, and it won an Emmy because Ace Hardware did a little mini documentary on my efforts and then combined it with another mom who lost her son in Maryland and the son also worked at the Ace store that she worked at. And that mini documentary was submitted to the film festivals and awards, uh, whatever the awards programs are. And it won an Emmy and got huge awareness all over the United States. So it definitely took on a life I never could have expected. So oftentimes when I am talking about Trevor, I say I knew my job as a mom was to teach my boys about the world, but I never could have imagined that my job has now become teaching the world about Trevor.
And to that end, I'm glad that you're ending there. I want to put one little pie in the sky thing out there in case anybody happens to be picking this up and reading and listening to this conversation that you and I are having. What is the next step where this needs to go? Because the first thing that came to mind is it is going to be law in California, at least. There's 50 states. Um, AEDs are now in every single public event because of the heart thing, and it saves lives. Technically, people are already dead, and you put an AED on them, it can bring them back to life. Um, what about colleges across the country? This should be in every single dorm room, in every single campus, in every single high school, in every single locker room, and I think big. I don't know where that's at, Michelle, but what are your dreams and aspirations? You have 30 seconds to put a plug in there of what you would like to do and an appeal to anybody who's listening to this to say, hey, we need your help.
I always tell people Google free Narcan near me. You can buy Narcan for $44.99 at CVS or your local drugstore, but free is a lot better. And there are a lot of organizations throughout the United States that are giving away Narcan. In
Mhm.
Marin County, we have Narcan vending machines.
Mhm.
So get Narcan. Even if you don't have anybody that you would use it on, you never know. You can only save lives with it. You cannot Narcan yourself. And so, just like how we learn CPR, learn how to use Narcan and recognize the signs of overdose.
And is there any particular group out there that you want to appeal to in terms of expanding the distribution? I mean, free Narcan is a great Google search that people can find it, but in terms of advocacy of people who may need to step up to educate, because you and the woman on the East Coast are part of a small group that put this together through ACE that created this bigger awareness, but the feet on the street, there's how many millions of people just in the United States alone? 330, 335 million people. There needs to be more communication done at all levels. So what would be your
Yeah.
dream of sharing this message, not for your sake, not for my sake, but for Trevor's sake?
I just try and get the tools into as many hands as possible. Locally, I've become good friends with Michelle and Micah Sr. of Micah's Hugs, who are in the North Bay. And their son Micah Jr. Was on the streets at the time. So their advocacy looks different than mine
Hmm.
because of Micah and their lived experiences.
Hmm.
Yesterday, they were in the Tenderloin handing out hamburgers, providing people with information for services, seeing if anybody needed Narcan. Um, in the post that my friend Michelle had shared, oh, actually, it was Jeremy that shared it. Um, he said that every single person that they met with had either uh, met someone that had been revived by naloxone or knew somebody who died from fentanyl. That is a horrific statistic. So we need to reverse that. Personally, my lane is education for young adults because we can cut it off at the knees if we get it before they're there.
Hmm.
And getting naloxone into as many hands as possible is great. I don't believe in cutting the federal support for naloxone because obviously it's made a difference and numbers have gone down. And if we cut that funding, I would hate to have our numbers go up.
Yeah.
And it's something I don't know much about, but the author of Dope Sick, Beth Macy, for instance, talks in her book, Raising Lazarus, about medically assisted treatment and treatment centers. And that's another area we can't cut the funding for it. We need to increase the funding for people who are seeking recovery. So that's my soapbox. I'll step down now.
I appreciate it. And folks, this is an ongoing conversation. It is not going to end in this hour-long episode visiting with Michelle Leopold, owner of six Ace Hardware stores in the San Francisco Bay Area, and mother first and foremost, and lost her son Trevor. But this has been a delight, and if this episode strikes a chord with anybody who's listening to it, please reach out, follow some of the advice that Michelle gave. There's tons of resources out there for people who are hurting and suffering, just like there are for addiction and recovery. This is another form of addiction and recovery that people need help for the survivors. And that's why I chose to invite you onto this episode, because you have made a difference. You are continuing to make a difference. And I am just so grateful that you spent a good amount of your day here before the holidays to put a message out there that I feel is probably one of the most important Christmas messages we could give. And I thank you for that.
Thank you,
Folks, this has
John.
been Dare to Be Great, Dare to Be You. See you next time. Thanks, Michelle.